Welcome back to Sons of the Shoe. Spencer German again with you, riding solo this week. And there was an interesting video that was making the rounds. I believe it was from the Ohio State's, the football team's golf outing that took place this week. And of course, you get all the alumni back, all the former coaches, all these different people. They're all in one place. And so you had some commentary from Urban Meyer and Jim Tressel, two of the greatest coaches in Ohio State history, obviously. That goes without saying. And they were talking about the state of Ohio State and the roster going into this season. There's been some commentary made on these comments from a notable college football columnist that we'll get to. But I want to play this clip here first, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
But as of now, this is one of the most talented rosters in the last decade, maybe ever. I mean, that's a big statement. They got to play, but you look at the quality of athlete at every position, I've never seen anything like it.
And I don't know if I've ever seen that many great players in that building all at once. Every position, every place you turned. And so Ryan's done a great job. Ohio State has done a great job.
All right, so again, the commentary there is interesting from two former Ohio State greats in terms of their coaching prowess. And I listen. So this has been dubbed, and I want to get into the question of whether or not it really is the greatest roster Ohio State has ever assembled. We can say the last decade, we can say the last, this century if you want. And I know the hard thing about that conversation is people are going to be very attached or sentimental about their Ohio State team. Like if you grew up in the early 2000s, the national championship team, actually I mentioned Dustin Fox earlier, that Dustin Fox was on, like that team is going to mean something to that era of people. And you can go back further and find other examples of that. The 2014 team, which that's the one I want to hit on the most, is the other example. Like people are going to be attached to their Ohio State team. But we'll get into that here in a second. I don't want to waste too much time on that right now, because the biggest thing that I saw come out of this was the fact that Dan Wetzel, notable college football columnist for Yahoo Sports, wrote a column about how Nick Saban used to say this, all the stuff coming out, the outside noise outside of a building. He used to refer to it as rat poison. And so the title of this column that Dan Wetzel wrote is Urban Meyer just served Ryan Day and Ohio State a big helping of rat poison. Now, I don't think that I think there's a lane you could take here where you're like, oh, Urban Meyer, what is he concocting here? Is he trying to throw a little bit more pressure on Ryan Day so that if he falters, they can come back to him? Everybody keeps thinking Urban Meyer wants to coach again, and he wants to put that hat back on, and he's still young enough that he could do it, and he stayed loyal to not coaching anywhere other than when he went to the NFL, other than Ohio State, and he's just doing the TV thing now, and okay, fine. I don't think that was this. I don't think this was some concocted plan by Urban Meyer where he's like, oh, let me go to the golf outing and see how much drama I can stir up to make myself more favorable to come back and take the job. No. I don't think Urban Meyer's doing that. I think he was genuinely just speaking in a very candid moment, saying, hey, this is maybe the most talented roster in Ohio State history, at least of the last decade. And that's saying something because he was coaching many of the teams of the last decade prior to passing the baton to Ryan Day. But here's the thing, like, and I get why the rat poison label is gonna be the headliner here, but I keep going back to what Tyvis Powell told me a couple episodes ago. All of us, we can all sit here objectively and say, hey, this Ohio State team, they should win a national championship. They're that good. There's going to be like the Vegas odds are going to tell you something about how likely it is Ohio State wins a national championship. Media pundits like Dan Wetzel are going to tell you Ohio State should be winning a national championship or have a shot to win a national championship. And that's all fine and good. Like, I've been adamant, though, and hearing Tyvis Powell even say it, like, it's not anything new for this program to know that they have those expectations. And yes, listen, the players change, and you got to sort of ingrain in them that there's always going to be these stakes. There's always going to be this pressure with Ohio State when you play here, when you're part of this brotherhood. You got to recognize that coming in. You got to try to block it out the best you can and just focus on the task at hand. But the Tyv is telling us that inside the program, they're talking like it's national championship or bust. Like, they know what's at stake here. They know what their roster looks like. I don't necessarily look to Urban Meyer dropping this nugget on us and say, oh, yeah, that's rat poison. He's trying to throw some adversity in their way, and the players have to try to block that out. I think they already know. I think and that's the other thing. If this was a young team, if this was a team just with a bunch of, sophomores who were sort of taking over, which might be the case, going into next year when so many guys leave, where you're having these guys that haven't really played a ton now stepping or have a sparing playing time. Now they're stepping in and thrusting into a starting role, and they're sort of leading the charge here. Like, I understand if it was a younger group that wasn't necessarily ready for that moment, fine. But this is a group, an upperclassman-laden group, so many players who came back from last year. I know that the big headliners were the transfer portal guys. Quinshon Judkins coming in. Will Howard, a quarterback, always going to grab headlines. Him coming in. And then on top of that, you got Caleb Downs, who's maybe the best athlete in the country, coming in to play safety and trying his hand at running back, which we'll get to in the third segment here coming up. But, yes, those names are going to grab your attention. It's the guys who are already here, the Travion Hendersons, the Emeka Abukas, the Jack Sawyers, the JT Tuimoloaus, the Denzel Burks. Like, those are the guys who I'm looking at and saying, listen, you have had expectations for 3-4 years now. You know what it's like. You know what it's like to fall short. So those are the guys who I think are sort of steadying the ship and sort of dictating the how they handle that, the external pressure that's trying to creep its way into the building. But also, if they're talking about it, like, I think they recognize it and they're just holding themselves to that standard. So I think Urban Meyer just saying this is holding themselves to that standard as well. We know he still is sometimes around the program. I'm sure they have him come back, and he was clearly at this golf outing, talk to the team, interact with the players. So yeah, I got to assume that it's nothing new to them to hear Urban Meyer or other people around the program say this. And I think they're already well equipped to handle it. So yes, Dan Wetzel is right that it is by definition, what Nick Saban would have called rat poison, coming from one of their own in a way. Oh, so bad. But I also think that this program is so equipped at this point to handle it. And they already know what's at stake. They already know that the roster's this talented and that they have high expectations. And they're talking about it like they have to meet those expectations themselves. So if they're already holding themselves to that standard, I'm not worried about something Urban Meyer said. Where I get more worried is in season. Like, if they go beat Oregon in early October and everyone's, thrilled about it, it's a statement of like where you are right now, the direction the program's setting, and after that, the next big game you're sort of circling is Penn State. But even if you get through that unscathed, we know Michigan's coming down in the back of our minds. We're all looking ahead to that because that's the prove it game for Ryan Day and could be a big factor in, determining a Big Ten champion or whatever. So that's the game we all got our eyes on. And I don't want, what I worry about is like the team getting too far ahead of themselves in that way. Urban used to have that issue, right? And as we talk about if this really is the best team in the last decade or beyond, that 2015 team came back after winning the national championship, loaded roster, and they sort of got it. They looked ahead and they slipped up against Michigan State in a game they should have won at home. And Urban got a little too conservative or doing too much. He got the opposite of conservative because he wasn't running the football with Ezekiel Elliott. I still remember Ezekiel Elliott calling out the coaching after the game for not handing the ball off to him more. But it was like, that's the thing I worry about, is more like in season. Right now, I think they understand, like, hey, we're going to go in. We're going to try to take it one game at a time. We're not going to get ahead of ourselves. But it's that emotional right now it's easy to kind of block all that out anyway. When you get to the season and you start winning big games, then it's like a test of, okay, are you looking too far ahead? Can you handle the added pressures that now are coming with, okay, you're having success. Now you got to keep it up. You're undefeated. Are you going to finish undefeated? You're in the Big Ten championship game. Are you going to win it? Which is one of the things that this group of players that all came back has cited as a big reason why they wanted to come back, was because they didn't check any of those boxes. They didn't win a Big Ten championship game. They didn't beat Michigan, and they didn't win a national championship. This year, they're supposed to have a chance to do all three. I don't think this is anything new or adds any massive pressure, because I think the pressure is already there, and I think they understand that, given the way that they're talking from inside the program, which is what Tyvis Powell even alluded to a couple weeks ago. The other part of this, as I said, is whether or not you believe Urban Meyer and Jim Tressel, who was at the tail end of that clip there as well, when they say that this is the most talented Ohio State roster of the last decade or maybe ever. Are you buying that? Because like I said, I understand there's going to be people who are impartial to certain teams that they grew up with or that they grew up around, and that makes total sense. But as I think back to, and it doesn't mean that they're going to win the like if they don't win the championship, I know that'll be something that's used against them, right? Like the 2002 team, they got the job done. So some people might be like, hey, that's the best team ever assembled. And there's certainly elements of that team. I mean, when you have Maurice Claret on your team and how phenomenally talented he was, like, of course there's going to be reasons why you point to that roster and try to argue back and forth on, like, well, this roster was better. Well, that roster was better. But I'm hard pressed, if I'm being 100% honest. Even looking back to some of these Urban Meyer teams, even looking back to some of these Jim Tressel teams, because here's the thing, like the Jim Tressel teams, they were talented in a different way, and they were like they like to out physical you. And I'm not trying to disparage. Like there's the one place I would say that maybe an Urban Meyer team or a Jim Tressel team has the advantage is probably at quarterback. Like I'm not putting Will Howard up against Troy Smith. I'm not putting Will Howard up against even probably JT Barrett, who he trusted by year 17 of him being in the program, to like, and even to an extent, like Cardale Jones was super talented. I'd probably say those guys, I trust them more. I've seen more. I think they're probably more talented players than maybe what Will Howard is right now. And I could be wrong in that, and I could be proven wrong in that. Craig Krenzel, maybe not so much. Like maybe I think I would probably take Will Howard over him for that off that 2002 team. But I understand, like, you could go up and down the roster and point to certain guys and say, hey, well, this guy on the 2002 team, like AJ Hawk was on the 2002 team as a freshman. Like, yeah, that dude was good. I'm not going to dispute that. Like there's certainly elements in certain players that you can point to and say, well, this makes this team talented, this makes that team talented. But the concept of what Urban Meyer and Jim Tressel were saying is like the collection of talent. So yeah, maybe the 2014 team or maybe some of Tressel's teams with Troy Smith or whatever had better quarterback play and still had some good receivers like Ted Ginn and all these other guys mixed in. But did they have the all-around collection of talent that this Ohio State team has? And I have to say no. And I think the closest team to it really is the 2015 team post-championship with Urban Meyer when they came back. I think that's the closest you're going to get to a team that had as much talent as this current Ohio State team has. And the reason I say that is just because we all remember coming back that year after they won the Natty and thinking to ourselves, like, dude, this team has no business not repeating. Ezekiel Elliott was back. You had Curtis Samuel on that team. Michael Thomas was back. Braxton Miller was back off the injury, coming out as a wide receiver, and he gave you that amazing play against Virginia Tech that year. On the defensive side, you had a ton of talent. That was still with the team at that time. Joey Bosa was back. Adolphus Washington, who was a great Ohio State defensive lineman. Draymond Jones was a freshman on that team. Probably didn't play a ton, but like you look, Eli Apple, who was good at Ohio State. I know maybe not at the NFL level. Malik Hooker was a freshman. Sam Hubbard was on that team. Von Bell was a junior coming back. Like they were loaded. They were loaded coming back that year to a point where you felt Tyvus, who we had on a couple weeks ago, like I said, he was coming back that next year on that same exact team. So yeah, like that team was so stacked that I think they come as close as we can get. But this team, the running back room they have, the defensive line group that's returning and very upperclassmen laden, the secondary being, again, they're calling themselves best in America, and you add Caleb Downs into the mix with a group again of upperclassmen heavy, an upperclassman heavy position there. I mean, this group this team is absolutely stacked, and I don't know if we've ever seen, to Tressel and Urban's point, I don't know if we've ever seen a team that was this loaded. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to win the national championship, and that might taint the argument of they're the best roster ever. But from a talent standpoint, find me an Ohio State roster that was as talented as this one that Ohio State's bringing in right now. And that's not even, I didn't even mention like a guy like Jeremiah Smith, who consensusly might be like, he is one of the top recruits to ever come to Ohio State. And he's going to make an impact year one. Like, that should tell you something. That dude's a freak. We've said it a billion times on this show. And so, yeah, like from top to bottom, talent-wise, I think this team is it. That doesn't guarantee anything, but I do think that this team is it from just that context or that lens that Urban Meyer and Jim Tressel were both talking about it in that clip, which, by the way, came from Adam King of 10 TV in Columbus. Guys, is this the best Ohio State, the most talented Ohio State roster of the last decade or even beyond, in your opinion? Leave us a comment at the 92 Through the Fan YouTube channel. You can also hit me up on X at Spencito_. Let's take a break. When we get back, Caleb Downs, his name's come up a number of times today. As a running back, sounds like it's a real possibility this year for the Buckeyes. We'll talk about it next on 92. I did the thing Nick does. I'll talk about it next on Sons of the Shoe.